Hello, and thanks for tuning into the show that goes around the continent to bring you stories near and far. I'm Joke Rogers at Channels Television here in Lagos, and I'm joined by my colleagues from the Voice of America in Washington.
Thanks. I'm Vincent McCory at the Voice of America. Happy to be with you again for another edition of Africa 54. Let's start off with the latest from Nigeria. Joke Rogers in Lagos brings you that story.
The Food and Agriculture Organization, the FAO, is addressing food security challenges worldwide. The director of the Office of Emergencies and Resilience of the Food and Agriculture Organization, Rain Paulson, highlights the importance of taking proactive steps in order to tackle food insecurity. He notes that millions of people around the world need humanitarian assistance in over 45 countries.
The COVID-19 pandemic, the climate crisis, environmental degradation, biodiversity loss and conflicts have created significant food security challenges worldwide in the past years. Currently, millions of people around the world need urgent support in over 45 countries. But just providing food aid isn't enough to tackle the growing hunger crisis, according to Rain Paulson, Food and Agriculture Organization's Chief of Emergencies. Ahead of a flagship UN hunger report to be launched next month, Mr. Paulson discussed critical concerns within the global humanitarian landscape and highlights the importance of proactive measures and investments that support local food production and enhance the resilience of agriculture in hunger hotspots.
One of the most visible changes, quite frankly, is the explosion, the mushrooming, the growth in the number of people in need of urgent assistance. The global humanitarian overview, that's a joint appeal coordinated by the United Nations together with partners, the Food and Agriculture Organization is part of it, launched at the end of last year an appeal to support some 230 million people. I mean, these numbers, quite frankly, are eye-watering. And it tells us that we need to do not just more, but we need to do it better.
Ms. Paulson, who has been working in the global emergencies sector for over 25 years, said the humanitarian landscape has changed vastly in the last decades, and the number of people who need humanitarian assistance is mushrooming.
Fundamentally, it's about putting resources in the hands of affected farming families. This means, for example, seeds, tools, technical assistance to allow them to plant for a coming season. It means keeping animals alive during a drought period or during a winter, and we do that through provision of emergency animal feed, even medical assistance, veterinary assistance to animals to keep these precious assets alive.
Somalia is another example where anticipatory actions could have prevented massive losses of lives and livelihoods if agricultural support were to have been provided on time.
Unfortunately, what we're seeing in the Horn of Africa is an example of early warning analysis and anticipatory action calls going really unheeded. FAO and other partners in the UN system back in late 2021 were calling for a scaled up response because we saw that rains were failing and indeed that communities and vulnerable households were under stress. So even back then we were saying there needs to be a scaled up response. We had the tragic experiences of 2017-18 and earlier drought events as well, hard-won experiences there that told us that we needed to work differently.
In a food crisis context, more than 70% of affected people live in rural communities and rely on agriculture for their livelihoods. However, only 4% of all the humanitarian response funding that goes into those protected emergency settings supports agriculture. There are calls for more funding for time-sensitive agricultural assistance in emergencies.
Joining us to discuss issues of hunger and food crisis in Africa is Niyi Ojolakwe, the country representative of UNFPA in Somalia. Welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
So hunger is one of the challenges plaguing the African continent. So because the continent has more than 200 million people facing starvation, how did this come to be?
Well, in Somalia, the major issue that we have right now has to do with climate change, the effects of climate change, and the effects of the different conflicts that we have in the country, and also it's also exacerbated by the activities of terrorists, the terrorist group Al-Shabaab. So that is the situation, and the situation is such that there's acute food insecurity. But there are other effects there are other ways in which this affects the people just beyond the issue of hunger and malnutrition that we all know.
So food insecurity caused by, also caused by failed crops, drought and famine are contributing factors to the issue of hunger on the continent and of course in Somalia, where you work. How can these issues be addressed?
We try to see things from the lens of women and girls. Even though there is food insecurity, there is a crisis and what have you, it still doesn't stop a woman from menstruating. And that comes with its difficulties and complications. It still doesn't stop a pregnant woman from having to go through the difficulties and the hardship that a pregnant woman has to go through. So we need to put in place measures and facilities and services to tackle the issues.
Right. Let me now take you up on that. So what are these measures, that you and the FPA and other agencies, partner agencies and possibly, private sector collaborators, what are these things being put in place to help these vulnerable people?
What we do is that we reach out to the population, we provide facilities to look after, to provide services for pregnant women, for women of reproductive age, and especially for the adolescent girls because they have special needs that needs to be taken care of. So we have facilities, we provide midwives, we provide equipment, and put in place reproductive health kits that women will need. We also put in place what we call the clinical management of rape. We have those services. There are rape kits that when it happens, when it is reported, we make available for women and girls of reproductive age so that they can come out of it. And we also provide psychosocial support. So across the entire country, UNFPA has 69 facilities, health facilities through which we provide sexual and reproductive health services. Then apart from that, we also have about 100 spaces that provides for the specific needs of women in terms of gender-based responding to the issues of gender-based violence.
On the back of that, the provision of those things are good, but how to get them across is another thing entirely. Across a major part of Africa, a lot of communities lack the physical infrastructure needed to get, these services and of course, and the food aid across. How can this be dealt with?
What we've had to do, and very, very expensive operational costs to airlift support to where they are. Now, the other part of getting things across to them is that one thing that is good is that we have in place IDP camps where people can run into, where we can reach them with the services. And so we have facilities there, and then people come there. Now, there is, on current basis right now, there is a conflict that is going on in an area called Lasanor around Somaliland. And in that particular place, of recent, and that took place, we're talking about 2-3 weeks ago, when fighting started. And the fighting has gone on, and in fact, about a month ago, and the fighting has gone on so much that about 500,000 people have been displaced. And of this figure, you estimate that you have about 200,000 of them who are women of reproductive age that need particular support that we need to provide. That is apart from the issues of hunger and malnutrition and outbreak of diseases that can happen. So in those places, fortunately, we already have implementing partners that are working there. We already have facilities with which we're reaching out with support to the normal general population before. And so what we have had to do is also to ramp up our activities there. We've had to lift things across there. But then also the conflict that is happening makes it very, very challenging to take supplies in terms of food across those places. So that's where we have.
Right, Niyi Ujolakwe, Country Director, UNFPA in Somalia. Thank you so much for joining us today on Africa 54.
Thank you for having me.
French medical aid group Doctors Without Borders has launched the first human papillomavirus vaccination drive for schoolgirls in Malawi. They aim to reduce cervical cancer in Malawi, which has the world's second highest death rate from the disease. Lamik Masina reports from Machinga district in Malawi.
Malawi rolled out its national human papillomavirus vaccination campaign in 2019, targeting 1.5 million girls aged 9 to 14 to prevent cervical cancer. But the COVID pandemic quickly disrupted the HPV vaccine drive with shifting medical priorities and social distancing. Medical aid group Doctors Without Borders, known by its French abbreviation MSF, this year launched a campaign to boost the low vaccine uptake by targeting girls at school.
It's easier to find this age group in schools than in a community. And at the school, we have the Minister of Education, which we works hand in hand with the Minister of Health. And it's easier to explain or to advocate, to mobilize these children to get to understand what is an HPV and how can they prevent it, mostly in line of a vaccine.
MSF says since January, they vaccinated about 65,000 girls in 300 schools. MSF says Malawi has the world's second largest death rate from the disease, 7 times the global average, with thousands dying every year. Before getting vaccinated, girls are also taught about the disease.
Health education has helped us to prepare the girls for the vaccine and to make them decide what to do on their own. As such, a lot of girls between 9 and 14 years of age volunteered to get the jabs. Some were even asking us to vaccinate them before they get consent from their parents.
Malawi in 2020 destroyed 20,000 expired doses of COVID-19 vaccines because of low uptake over myths and misunderstandings. The HPV vaccine faced the same resistance as some parents refused consent.
Their fear was that they suspected that we were vaccinating their children to make them infertile. Some suspected that we want to vaccinate their children against COVID-19 and that we have just changed the appearance of COVID-19 doses.
Malawi health officials say meetings with village chiefs and parents helped debunk those myths, and the vaccination rate has soared in the MSF drive.
Which this support can be normalized also, so that MSF can support us each and every time when we need to have this support on the HPV.
MSF says if there are no more disruptions, they'll keep up vaccinations to try to bring down Malawi's high death rate and maybe even one day stop cervical cancer. Lamik Masina for VOA News, Machinga District, Malawi.
Insecurity in the eastern provinces of North Kivu and Ituri has disrupted the education calendar of about 750,000 young Congolese residents. This is according to the United Nations data put out in March 2023, which also shows that armed conflict has forced over 2,000 schools to shut down. Students are left wondering when or if they will ever return to the classrooms.
Thomas Tumusifu Baragia wishes he was studying for his final school exams. Instead, he scrapes a living doing odd jobs in a displaced people's camp in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo after a wave of rebel violence upended his life yet again.
When I am in the camp, I see students from Goma in their final year like me. It hurts my heart because I can't continue my studies because of the war. When I see them passing and others doing their internships, it really hurts my heart. I wonder when I will finish my studies. The years are passing by.
Baragia fled the town of Kibumba with his family in October amid a renewed offensive by the M23 rebel group. The the third time in 15 years he's been forced to escape his home. He is now 22 and still waiting to complete school. According to statistics from UNICEF, he is one of the 750,000 young Congolese whose schooling is currently disrupted by insecurity in the eastern provinces of North Kivu and Ituri.
My studies started to get disrupted with the war against the Congrès National pour la Défense du Peuple. We fled to Kanyaruchinya. We spent a whole year there. And in 2012, we fled again to the same place for almost a whole year. All of this meant that I had several blank years in my school career. Here we are in 2022 and 2023. I have fled again from the war with M23, and here we are again next to Kanyaruchinya. Impossible for me to study.
In the small camp next to an evangelical church outside the provincial capital Goma, Baragia spends his time leaning against the tin wall of the church or playing cards with school friends, also displaced from Kimbumba. Since January 2022, about 2,100 schools in eastern Congo have had to close because of armed conflict.
My life's dream was to go to the university after my secondary education in order to look for a job, become a teacher, and earn a living.
The damage could be lasting without access to education. The UN is concerned children and young people can miss the chance to develop the skills needed to escape poverty and overcome the desperate economic challenges that help fuel conflict in places like mineral-rich eastern Congo.
April marks an important step in the reconstruction of Paris's iconic Notre Dame Cathedral, heavily damaged by fire 4 years ago. The base of the new spire is to be built, and officials hope to reopen the cathedral by the end of next year. From the eastern French town of Bray, where the work on the spire is being done, Lisa Bryant reports for VOA on the monumental task of rebuilding this masterpiece of Gothic architecture.
More than 20 craftsmen, hundreds of hours, and thousands of trees. That's what it takes to rebuild just the base and the spire of Notre Dame. These carpenters are rushing to finish the base, marking exactly 4 years since a massive fire ravaged Notre Dame. The spire itself is planned to be up by year's end.
This part, which you can see here, takes a lot of all the structure and the weight of the whole carpentry comes on it. It's the basis from the whole spire.
Like other craftsmen here, Van Berkel has worked on historic monuments before. This project is different.
I'm really grateful for this opportunity because it's just amazing and really exceptional. And it's a kind of work once in a lifetime.
The fire at the medieval Catholic cathedral shocked the world. For many of all different faiths, it was a tragedy. Its reconstruction is also highly symbolic.
In 2024, we have two major events in France. We have the organization of the Olympic Games in summer, and we say we will reopen the cathedral 5 years after the fire, that is to say in 2024. And I deeply think that the reputation of France is at stake.
Workshops across France and even in Germany are tasked to deliver on that promise. Each specializes in a particular craft. For now, visitors can see the cathedral from the outside and its artifacts at special exhibits. Rebuilding Notre Dame's spire was hotly debated. Should France choose to replicate the elegant 19th century work by French architect Eugène Viollet-le-Duc, or go for something radically new? Authorities finally chose the first option.
If we don't rebuild it as it was, we would break down the unity, architectural unity of the monument, and something of the authenticity of the cathedral, because authenticity is not only material, authenticity is also spiritual. And here we can see a part of both.
Notre Dame's reopening promises to be a global celebration. But for these workers, it will be bittersweet. The end of years of hard work and an extraordinary adventure. Lisa Bryant for VOA News, Briey, France.
A serpent-like robot designed by students from Northeastern University in Boston, Massachusetts, could revolutionize how NASA astronauts explore the lunar surface. VOA's Ken Farabao has more.
Northeastern University student Andre Neto Caetano watched NASA's Artemis 1 launch from Kennedy Space Center in Florida live on a device in the lobby of a hotel across the country in California.
I just kind of had like not a flashback, but a flash forward, I guess, of seeing maybe Artemis 4 or something, and Cobra is like part of the payload and it's being deployed on the moon to do what it was meant to do.
Artemis 1 launched the night before Caetano and his team presented their crater-observing bio-inspired rolling articulator, or COBRA, rover project in NASA's 2022 Breakthrough, Innovative, and Game-Changing, or Big Idea Challenge. The big challenge for Caetano's team was impressing judges assembled in the remote California desert.
They were skeptical that the mobility solutions that we were proposing would actually work.
A skepticism born from the simplicity of their design.
A robot that moves like a snake, and then the head and the tail connect and it just rolls.
NASA's Big Idea Challenge and the associated prize money prompted teams of college students to develop solutions for the agency's goals in the upcoming Artemis missions to the moon.
Extreme lunar terrain mobility.
Northeastern's Cobra can uniquely move through fine desert sand, similar to the dust or regolith of the lunar surface, to probe the landscape for interesting features, including ice and water.
They never could sort of deploy a robot, a ground vehicle that can sort of negotiate this environment, can get to the bottom of this crater and look for ice water content.
Professor Ali Reza Ramazani advises Northeastern University's team developing Cobra and is experienced in designing robots that mimic real organisms.
So with like him building like a robot dog and a robot bat and things like that, we knew we wanted to kind of have some bio-inspiration in our projects.
Ramazani hoped Cobra's simple snake design could win over judges in NASA's competition.
Our robot sort of tumbled 80, 90 feet down this hill and sort of, that impressed the judges. We did this with minimum energy consumption and within like 10, 15 seconds.
Cobra is cost-effective, too.
Perhaps if you want to have a spaceworthy platform, is going to be in the order of like $100,000 to $200,000. You can have many of these systems.
So the fact that Cobra is super light kind of brings benefit to it as well.
The Northeastern team's November demonstration of Cobra in the California desert put to rest any lingering skepticism, sending them to the top of NASA's 2022 Big Idea competition, and hopefully, in the not-too-distant future, to the top of NASA's SLS rocket system on its way to the moon.
I'm not saying this. Our judges said that it's potentially going to transform the way that future space explorations would look like.
Kane Fairbaugh, VOA News, Chicago.
Well, and that's our show for today. You can find all the continent's top news and world news online at voaafrica.com. Check it out. I'm Vincent McCory in Washington. Channels Television has our last word.
We look forward to bringing you another show next week. To remember, channelstv.com remains your source for news and other programming. I'm Joker Rogers. Thanks for watching and goodbye.